men are afraid of being dominated and controlled by women and are in great denial about the fact that they need women. Most therapists are pretty much unaware of what you and I are talking about today.
How can women create a space that encourages men to open up emotionally?
And that is the one that women are really most surprised to learn, is that men are afraid that they will leave them. You will understand your relationship differently when you understand the ways in which men are afraid. It changes everything.
I've heard many times that men need to have sex to feel loved and women need to feel loved to have sex.
That is so true and so brilliant. And the reason men often can get to closeness only through sex is that
Dr. Weiss is a psychologist with over 40 years of experience practicing and teaching psychotherapy. He is the award-winning author of 4 books, including the Amazon best-selling Hidden in Plain Sight: How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships. Enjoy this conversation with Dr. Weiss. What is it about women that men are afraid of?
Well, that would take the rest of our time to answer. In the book, I suggest there are 7 different fears that men have of women, moving from those that are more sort of obvious and recognized to those that are more unconscious that people don't really know about. So the ones that are more, I won't go through all 7, but just give you a few of them. The ones that people would recognize or not be surprised by are things like men are afraid of being dominated and controlled by women. And the way you know that's true is how often men protest that they are not dominated and controlled by women. So my working title for the book, which the publishers would not allow, was I wanted to call the book Pussy Whipped, because I think it's sort of an intriguing thing that the worst thing that one man can say to another man is that he's controlled by a woman. Or if you think about it another level deeper, it's not just saying you're controlled by a woman, but that you're controlled by your need for a woman. So I would add that to the list for your question. Men are afraid of their own dependency needs and afraid of needing women and are in great denial about the fact that they need women. And again, you know that's true because in heterosexual couples, when there's a breakup, who is it that desperately goes out and starts dating before the ink's dry on the documents? It's men who typically move out there and re-engage faster because they haven't ever been alone and don't have a clue what to do with themselves when they're alone. And then if we move down the list to the fears that are less recognizable but are connected, would be things like the fear of abandonment, that men are sort of aware on some level that how dependent they are on their partners, primarily emotionally, is what I'm talking about, and that they're not likely and don't do well on their own. And then some level they're aware of that.
What comes to mind first are all the men who do like to be dominated. I know there's some sort of market for that because there's dominatrix type.
Absolutely.
So how does that work? Is it the majority of men that have this fear about being dominated, or is it about being dominated and then something happening to them?
I think it's actually all heterosexual men have the fears that we're talking about. It's a kind of a bold thing to say, but I've yet to meet one who doesn't. So I'm going to say all. And the dominatrix stuff is really interesting. I read a memoir by a dominatrix called Whip Smart. And one of the things that's really interesting that I did not know is there's absolutely no genital and no sexual contact in these encounters. It's forbidden, and it's not what the men are there for. And so the way that fits in with what I'm talking about is being dominated is sort of the forbidden fruit, because the fear of being dominated, of course, masks also a desire to be dominated. And so I think the popularity of the BDSM movement, if we can call it that, reflects these fears.
Now, how do these fears affect intimate relationships?
They affect them a great deal, and they affect them even more than they need to, because most therapists are pretty much unaware of what you and I are talking about today. So I give workshops around the country for therapists around this topic and how to work with men and how to work with heterosexual couples in psychotherapy. And mostly the therapists are looking at me like I'm a crazy person, like they can't imagine that what I'm saying, but it doesn't take long. Particularly the men get it very quickly, and the women are more puzzled because it doesn't make sense to you as women, because men are in such an obviously dominant position in so many ways in the world. What have they got to be afraid of is sort of how women take on it. And it takes them a while to understand. But your question was about how does it affect relationships? It is the primary driver in a pattern that will be familiar to you and most of your viewers, which is the classic argument in a heterosexual couple is usually begins with the woman wanting some kind of greater connection or intimacy with her partner. So she makes an approach. Honey, let's go on a date tonight. We never go out together anymore, just the two of us. In her mind, that is an approach to be closer. In the man's mind, that's a criticism and a declaration of his inadequacy. Oh, I don't take you out enough. Oh, I'm not a good enough. Because men are socialized to believe that not only are they in charge, but they're responsible for their partner's happiness. So this is why men, by the way, are preoccupied with orgasm, not theirs, but their partners in sex, because that's like they're great on the exam. That's the measure of how they did as a sexual partner. And so the same thing is true emotionally. If you say to a man, let's go out tonight, we really don't, we haven't been out in such a long time, he hears that as, I'm not doing my job as a husband. So she approaches, he feels criticized, which is the single word I hear most often from men in psychotherapy is criticized. And he does what people do when they feel criticized. He withdraws. So here's a woman who's feeling distant from her partner and making an approach to get closer. And what did she get? Withdrawal. It made it worse. What the hell? What's going on? So what does she do? She does more of the same. She approaches with a little more energy. The man withdraws it. So that fear of being inadequate is what's driving that whole pattern. And women don't understand what's happening because I'm trying to be nice here. I'm trying to get connected. I want to go out for a nice dinner. Why are you withdrawing?
It sounds like there's a gap in communication. Like we don't know how to communicate our actual needs to our partner.
Well, I think particularly for men, that's even more so because men are socialized to not have needs. And if they do have needs, to meet them themselves. I was speaking with somebody this week who is looking at a pretty serious illness and the possibility of needing care from his partner. And the hardest part of it for him is going to be letting his partner take care of him, which he's going to need to learn to do.
Yeah, I could imagine. And I mean, we're obviously talking about masculine men.
Well, all men are subject to the same conditioning, no matter how masculine they may seem to you or may see themselves. All men are subject to the same conditioning, and it starts. We know, we have research that we can see that conditioning starting with infants as young as 4 months. So little bitty babies, when girl babies, hurt themselves, the parents are soothing, reassuring. It's okay, honey, get up, you're okay. Boy babies hurt themselves, parents are more likely to be like, come on, get up, you're okay, let's get back to it. It's a very different message. If you ever go to watch a kid's sporting event, you'll watch when the kid falls down, the first thing they do is they look at the sideline for their parents, and they're looking for a cue of how to respond. And if the parents go, oh my God, is he okay? They'll start crying. If their parents go ahead, get back in the game, he or she will get up and get back in the game. And boys and girls get very different messages in those situations. So then as adults, when they get hurt, they already know what to do because they've been doing it their whole lives.
That's so interesting. And now I'm reflecting on the fact that when I was growing up, I had both sides. So I had my dad who put my sister and I in softball, I think because he never got any boys. And if we got an injury, it was walk it off,
Right.
And my mom, on the other hand, was the the nurturing, wanted to just hold us. And so what happens if a man gets both? Is that ideal?
It is. I was just thinking to say to you, lucky you, because you then have a repertoire of acceptable responses. That messaging to you was it's okay if sometimes you're really hurt and you need to go to the bench, and maybe you should try to walk it off first and see maybe it doesn't hurt as much as you think it does. And so you got from your parents the gift of a wide range of behaviors.
So going back to the intimate relationships, now that we know the wife or the woman in the relationship wants to go to dinner or wants to do these things, it's the needs aren't being communicated effectively. Now the man has this other idea in his mind of what she's actually saying to him, interpreting it differently than what she means. Now what? How is this going to affect the fears in the relationship? What's going to happen to the relationship?
Well, it compounds them. It validates for the men that what they're afraid of is worth being afraid of, because here they are feeling criticized and being told they're inadequate, which is exactly what they were afraid would happen. So often the couple ends up more polarized. So I've been doing a workshop for non-therapists, for just the general public, called What Men and Women Don't Understand About Each Other and Why It Really Matters. And the format for the workshop is, I don't know if you're old enough to remember TV shows like The Dating Game or The Newlywed Game, things like that. So they take couples and they ask them questions before, and then they try to guess what their partner said. So that's how we do the workshop. So I take situations that often come up, like the dinner one I just did with you, and I ask couples to predict, or I ask the women in the audience what they think the men would say in that situation. And of course, they're wrong. And I ask the men, so I'm trying to encourage, intergender curiosity, because it's hard for men and women, because we all assume that everybody thinks the way we do. And if you don't believe that, just turn on the news any night and you'll see the truth of that. We're in a country filled with people who can't stretch themselves to imagine the way another person thinks. And unfortunately, it's often that way in our relationships. And so when women read this book, their response is like, oh my God, really? That's how you feel? That's what's going on? I had no idea. And of course, that's really a critically important first step when you start hearing those kind of, I think that's how good fights in couples always go. At the end of a good fight, you're sitting there going, I had no idea. Now I get it. I didn't know that's what you were trying to say. Why couldn't you tell me that 3 hours ago? But it takes 3 hours to get to that sometimes.
The book you're referring to, Hidden in Plain Sight, How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships. Besides reading your book, what can couples do to extinguish these fears?
I think extinguished, I'm going to use a different word than extinguished, because I don't think fears are extinguished. I think they're managed, or we adapt to them. So I think there's a reasonable amount of fear, which is a good thing in a relationship. I think that when people become too complacent with each other, they stop sort of bringing their A game to the relationship. So I don't think my wife is going to leave me, but I also don't think it couldn't happen. And so I pay attention, and I pay attention to how things are going and how things are going for her in the relationship. And I'm interested in how things are going for her in the relationship. I'm not just taking that for granted. So starting there, I think the idea is learning how to live with the fears. And the thing that has been most surprising to me in this work is that for men, the first step is talking with other men, not talking with their partners. And it's something I've learned over time, because I run psychotherapy groups for men. And you would be shocked to see the way, how intimately, how not guardedly and openly men talk with each other when women are not there. And so, because they're not afraid. So they're not walking on eggshells, they're not being careful, they're not being guarded. And these groups, you would be stunned to see what goes on in these groups, how open and vulnerable, and how much the men love it. how committed they are to it, how engaged and active, and it's a wonderful experience for them to be in a situation where they don't have to be afraid.
Yeah, the friendships are critical. And I read recently that I believe it's 1 in 3 men don't have someone that they can call a best friend.
Oh, I would say it's 9 and 10 is probably the number. It's a terribly tragic, it's something I have a lot of feelings about. Little boys have very, very, very close friendships with other little boys. As close and intimate, although we don't really think about it this way, boys' friendships with other boys are as intense and deep and intimate as little girls' friendships are with other little girls. So what happens? Well, in our culture, it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but bear with me. In our culture, when you were born, you knew you were female. You knew your gender. You didn't have any question about it. You didn't have to do anything to earn it. It's just how you always thought of yourself. It's not that way for boys. Boys are taught that to be a man is something that you have to earn, and then you have to defend always. That you can never relax your guard, because we define masculine in this culture not as an aspiration, but as a negative. Masculine is defined as not feminine. So how do you present as masculine in the world? You make sure you don't do anything that looks feminine. Unfortunately, in our culture, intimacy, closeness, vulnerability, tenderness, warmth are all considered feminine traits. So little boys get to a choice point in their lives. They're told, you can have access to this world of privilege and power that comes with being a man, but you have to give up anything about you that might make anybody think you are feminine. And an intimate relationship with another boy is definitely seen as feminine. So they have a Sophie's choice. They have to make a choice between being a man, which means giving up everything that has been, giving up close relationship with their mother, giving up a close relationship with other boys. And most of us choose the power and privilege. And then we get to adulthood and we want to be intimate with a woman, and we haven't done it in 10 years. We've lost, we don't really understand how to do it anymore. And so we're terrified because it's not only not a home field, it's an away game in a very hostile crowd.
I feel like the definitions of masculinity and femininity have been skewed over time. I think of, people think that masculine is getting angry and reacting when something, like road rage type of thing. But really, the masculine it's still, it's calm. And how much has society played a role in all of this over time?
Entirely. It is entirely conditioning. I actually just read a scientific paper that was a review of research with over 2 million participants. So it's one of the biggest studies ever done, looking at how much of gender is innate. Almost none. It's almost all conditioned. The differences between men and women are actually infinitesimally small. Just like, by the way, if you look at DNA of people of different races, it's like 99.6% the same. And like 0.4%, all this to do is about like 0.4% difference, right? It's the same in gender. Men and women are innately remarkably similar. It's just that we've taught it to be very different. It is almost all learned.
So we've just been programmed this way. So
That's exactly right.
Do we need to deprogram ourselves?
Yes. Well, thank God it's happening. All right, I know more about this on the men's side because I am one and I work with men. But it's very heartening. I'll tell you the story that always occurs to me because it's so meaningful. My son and daughter have two now 5.5-year-old twin boys. So when I go to visit, they get together with lots of other people with little kids. So there's lots of 30-somethings in a room with lots of little 5 and under-year-old kids. And when I tell you that when a kid starts crying in that crowd, it's the dads who get up to see what's wrong. Like I'm talking 98% of the time. The moms sit there drinking their wine, just like guys used to do. The moms sit there and they're not worried. They know the dad, because it's not the first time these dads have gotten up to check on a kid. It's obviously routine. And so the dads are confident in their ability as a parent, and the moms are confident in their ability. So the moms are relaxed, and the dads get up and be dads. And so when I see that, I think, okay, well, at least some of us are trying to do this differently and succeeding.
You mentioned in the beginning about some of these fears being unconscious. How do we address this differently for the men who have these fears unconsciously versus the ones who are conscious of these fears?
It's a great question. If you think about it, how do you know if you have a fear that's unconscious? Well, you see it reflected in your behavior. Even you're not aware of having the fear, you can see it reflected in your behavior. So perhaps your partner would say to you, in the hypothetical argument we were talking about, perhaps your partner would say to you, I don't understand why you're getting defensive. I'm asking you out to dinner. I was thinking maybe we'd have a nice meal and maybe come home and have sex, have a nice time. But what were you hearing me say? So clearly the answer is you need a partner to help you be aware of the parts of yourself that you are not aware of because they're unconscious. And so hopefully you have people in your life who love you enough, a partner or a good friend, who will say to you, you know, every time I ask you to, you do, or will point out to you something about yourself. I mean, that's what happens in therapy, of course. And that's why I've always done a lot of groups, because in groups you have, you know, in individual therapy, you have just me sitting there telling you what I see. In a group, you have 7 other people sitting there. So you get a lot more feedback and a lot more information about how you're acting.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible.
It is.
And that's a great practice. So is this something when couples are not in a session with you or in a group session, is that something that you have them do, is kind of
Absolutely.
repeat back what you heard?
No, it's not as concrete as repeat back what you heard. It's more talking with another person about how they are affecting you. You know, I just invited you for dinner, and when you pulled back like that, it really was discouraging, because I'm trying to do something to get, and so I don't understand why you're pulling. Do you not want to be? So it's not just here's what I heard you saying. It's more how what you said affected me.
And that's a mirror to the person who is doing the listening.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, we treat listening as if it were a simple thing that anybody can do. But, you know, I went to graduate school for 7 years to learn how to listen. It's not such a simple thing to do. And I still am learning how to be a better listener, because listening doesn't just mean telling the other person what they just said. Listening is all the between the lines, the subtleties, the nuances, the being willing to talk about your own experience. All that goes into listening.
Are you telling me that in your marriage, you still have to put these things into practice?
Of course, absolutely. That's why I'm still married, because I do. Yeah, I mean, you know, great musicians don't stop practicing when they get really good. They keep practicing. Why is it we think that in a marriage you don't have to work on it anymore after a while? Like, doesn't make it. Marriage is one of the 2 hardest things to do in the world. And you could probably guess the other one is parenting. So why would we think that one of the 2 hardest things to do in the world doesn't require ongoing practice? Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And also, why would you think that doing that you don't need help in doing one of the hardest things in the world? I never understand why couples act as if going to therapy means some defeat or some admission of failure. I'm like, I'm sorry you feel that way, but for me, I need help. And it's important to me. So it's very important, and I can't do it by myself.
Mhm. Yeah, it's hard to see your own blind spots.
Yeah, which I like to say to people, you know, what does your rear end look like? Who knows?
Right.
I can't see.
Now, speaking of being married, having a wife, how can women create a space that encourages men to open up emotionally?
Great question. One of the biggest surprises to me in this work has been how much it impacts women, how helpful it is to women. So I did a workshop a number of years ago with men and women, And the workshop had an unusual format. We met for 3 days, and then we didn't meet again for 4 months. And when we met again for 3 days, same group of people. So that gave people 3 or 4 months. That gave people an opportunity to go home and practice some of what they were learning in their relationships, and then check back in 4 months later to see how it's going. Well, the women came back and reporting more changes in their relationships from the work we had done than the men did. And the biggest changes came about because their assumptions about where the men were coming from were clearly wrong. And what they learned about where men really are coming from enabled them to be more empathic. So instead of feeling like this guy's just a jerk, I asked him to dinner, he doesn't want to do it, and da 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 da, they're like, oh, I wonder if he's, so it makes a huge, so actually I want to read you a quote from one of the women in that workshop, because she said it so well. She said, I understand that my husband has not been ignoring, dismissing, or hurting me out of a lack of respect, as I suspected, but that he's scared to hurt me, scared to mess up with me, scared to not be enough. I had honestly never imagined that he was scared, and that I was so profoundly important to him that he was constantly terrified I would leave him. And that is the one that women are really most surprised to learn, is that men are afraid that they will leave them.
Yeah. That's deep. And that's a profound realization. And how long had she been in that relationship?
Oh, it's a long-term relationship. I mean, I would guess something like 20 years. It is profound, and women understand it. So what a lot of couples are doing, which I did not think of this other people figured out in their own, is they're reading the book together, not sequentially, but simultaneously. So each person reads chapter 1, then they make a time to sit and talk about chapter 1 before they start chapter 2. Then they read chapter 2, and they make a time to talk again. And I think that's been a very helpful process for a lot of couples, mostly eye-opening for the women, and for the men, it's a way of trying to express what they have not been able to communicate.
Is this recommended for all couples, or do you need to be facing troubles in your relationships, or could it be done more as a preventative?
Oh, it's absolutely recommended. I want to qualify that by saying all heterosexual couples, because for gay folks, it's an entirely different set of issues, and I'm happy to talk about that. But yes, for all heterosexual couples, and I would say the sooner the better. Same thing as I'd say about therapy. Don't wait till you're, have your lawyer's number on your speed dial. You should be talking to somebody from the beginning, ideally. I mean, I think the Catholic Church has a brilliant, you can't get married in the Catholic Church without some kind of premarital counseling, which I think is a great idea. Because, divorce is very expensive for society. And anything we can do to support couples is a very good idea.
What about pre-marriage? How early is too early to start addressing this?
The first date would be a little early. I don't think there is such a thing as too early, because if you're dating and you're talking about your relationship, you're practicing the skills that you're going to need if you marry each other. And so I don't think there is such a thing as too soon.
What role does vulnerability play in breaking down these fears?
Well, vulnerability and fears are almost the opposite of each other. Fears, why do you get afraid? You get afraid when you are worried that you're going to lose something or be harmed. And so fear protects vulnerability. And so fear has to be managed in order to be, you can't just say to people, be more vulnerable. You have to address what it is they're frightened about, so that you can manage the fears so that they can be more open and vulnerable. And that's why it often doesn't go well between men and women, because women don't understand that men are scared, not through no fault of your own. It's not like you're dense and don't understand it. It's that men are doing everything they can to hide it. Thus the title of the book, Hidden in Plain Sight. Once you know that men are afraid of women, you can't stop seeing it. You're watching TV, you see it in TV. You're watching a movie, you go to a friend's house, oh, he's really afraid. you see it everywhere once you understand this. But until you understand it, men's behavior is kind of puzzling because you don't understand how they want to be married to you and they want to have sex with you, but they don't want to talk to you. It's very confusing.
I've heard many times that men need to have sex to feel loved and women need to feel loved to have sex.
That is so true and so brilliant. And the reason men often can get to closeness only through sex is that it's less vulnerable. So that you can sort of do an end run around the vulnerability and connect physically. You don't need words, you don't need emotions. You can just connect physically. And that's often a cause of some of the sexual miscommunication in heterosexual relationships, is that they're really coming from different places. So if things are not going well, the woman probably doesn't want to have sex and the man more wants to have sex. If things are going well, the woman's probably more interested in sex and the man is less interested because he's not worried about anything.
So where do you go from there?
Well, you learn other ways to be close than sex. Not that sex isn't a good way to be close, but it doesn't have to be the only way to be close. And so men have to learn that when they're worried about distance in the relationship or being abandoned, that sex is not the only way to approach their partner, because that's probably not a good starting place for her. So as a woman once brilliantly said to her partner in a couple session, she said, "What you don't understand is that foreplay begins when we wake up in the morning," which I thought was just brilliant. And that's what men need to understand, is that it's fine if sex is where you want to get to, but there's going to be a process to get there. It's for her, it's not just about not being scared anymore. She wants to feel close to you before she wants to have sex with you.
Yeah, on that note, I heard of I don't remember his name, but it was a celebrity who said that he sleeps with his wife for, I don't know, 12 hours. And everyone thought, what? And he said, not literally, but in the morning, kisses her on the cheek. In the afternoon, sends her a text, that he's thinking of her. And like you're saying, it starts, in the morning. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exciting. I mean, it's like a day of foreplay. It's like you're thinking about it, you're anticipating it. It's like if you're going out to a great restaurant tonight, you think about, oh, I wonder if I'll have an appetizer and then make a great salad. And, the anticipation builds up the excitement.
How often do you want to do that with your partner?
Do I want to have sex? Is that what you're asking me?
Not you
I don't know each
specifically.
other that well yet.
How often would you recommend that couples start, the foreplay thing with the little gestures throughout the day? It's obviously you don't want to do it every day because that takes away from it.
Why? I don't understand this question. I get this question all the time, and I don't understand people thinking that too much of a good thing is going to be bad. Like, my answer is, as much as you can possibly, like, being nice to somebody is not, there's not a toxic limit. Being loving and kind and thoughtful, it's not like you have a certain reservoir and you run out. The way I always say this to anybody is that if you have more than one child, when your first child was born, you loved that child with all your heart. You didn't hold anything back. So then you had a second child. Where'd the love for that second child come from? Did you take half of it from your first child and give it? I don't think so. I don't think you loved your first child less. So it's what's the word? Maybe exponential. It builds. That once you start doing this, when you haven't been doing it, it seems like a job.
Mhm.
But once you start doing it, it seems like something that feels good, that you look forward to. And so there's not a too much. There's not a be careful, don't be too nice, don't be too loving. It just keeps getting better.
All right, I would love to hear your opinion on this then. I have a friend who her partner lives elsewhere half the time. And when they're apart, he wants a picture of her. and basically every day, but she doesn't want to send one every day because then, he's expecting it. Maybe he's not as grateful anymore. You say, yes, send the picture every day.
No, it's not my place to tell her what she should be comfortable with, but I would be curious. So it sounds like she's trying to manage his feelings. Oh, it's not that you didn't say she's uncomfortable doing it. It sounds like she's doing it to get a certain result, but I don't know if that's true or not. So I think the next step would be her saying to him, I get that you would like to have a picture every day, but I'm worried that if I send it every day, you won't really appreciate it. And I don't know what his answer would be. And I don't know if they tried it, how it would go. Maybe he would say, yeah, it's not as special if you send it every day. Let's make it more fun. I don't know, but that would be the starting place to have that conversation.
I'll pass it along.
Okay. Free of charge.
What advice would you give to someone who feels like they're stuck in a cycle of fear and avoidance in their relationship?
That's a tough one, because the thing that's really hard to know in that situation is that about you, or is that about this particular combination of human beings that you're involved in? Like what you don't know is, if I were with another partner, would I still be as afraid and avoidant? Or is that sort of a reflection of what I'm like in this relationship? So the advice I always give to people is, when you're in that kind of conflict, is to do everything you can to be your true, authentic, real self, whatever the risks are. Because that's the only way to know whether or not there's room in this relationship for you to be your real self. So if you start being more real, let's say, for example, I'll pick a silly one. Let's say that you like to go to bed early, and your partner doesn't like it when you go to bed early because he thinks you should be together every hour of every day, whatever it is. But you really like to go to bed around 8:30, let's say, and you haven't been going to bed at 8:30, and you're tired every day because you're not getting enough sleep. So now I would say, tell your partner that you're tired every day, that you're not getting enough sleep, that you really need to go to bed earlier, and that you certainly honor and respect and appreciate his interest to spend more time with you. Maybe he'd like to get up earlier in the morning and spend time with you, or maybe you could have lunch together, or maybe to honor his needs, but honor yours as well. And then one of two things is going to happen. You're going to be yourself in the relationship, and it's either going to get better or it's going to get worse. And that's how you know whether or not this is really more about you. If you start being more honest and genuine and real, and your relationship gets better, that's not one of your top 10 signs.
If there was one takeaway from your book that you hope listeners would remember, what would it be?
That a lot of what you think about couples is not accurate. And you will understand your relationship differently when you understand the ways in which men are afraid. It changes everything.
I have two closing questions, but before I ask them, where would you like the listeners to go? Where could they find your book or learn more about your work?
You can find more about my work and the book on my website, which is avrumweissphd.com, avrumweissphd.com. You will also find a mailing list there. I write regularly for Psychology Today, and on all kinds of interesting, odd, I think my last article was about a different way to think about manipulation. So I have all kinds of interesting, but they're almost all about relationships. And if you sign up for the mailing list, you'll get a copy of everything I write, and you'll also get a free ebook on relationships.
Very neat.
The other thing is, I pride myself. One of my pet peeves are people who get too big for their britches and don't return phone calls and don't return emails. I always return my emails. If you email me with a question or a comment and you don't hear back from me, it's because I didn't get the email. Send it again. Because if I get your email, now I'm going to be on a boat for a month. I'm not sure how consistently I'll be returning emails then, but eventually I'll reply.
Dr. Weiss, what is your number one health tip? So that could be emotional, physical, diet, nutrition, spiritual, just the one piece of advice that you would like everyone to know.
Fuck. It's an amazing thing. I'm a dog lover, had dogs my whole life. And I got asked on a podcast once, what would be the one technological advance you would hope to see in your lifetime? And I said, I want somebody to figure out a way to tell me what my dog's thinking. Drives me crazy. I wish I knew what my dog was thinking. I wish my dog could talk. So here's human beings. We're the only animal, I guess. I guess some others can talk, but I don't know that they can communicate back and forth. We have this incredible gift to be able to talk to each other. We don't use it. We leave it sitting on the shelf, gathering dust. So my one tip to be healthier and happier would be talk.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of our problems would be solved if we understood each other more.
Boy, did you say a mouthful there. I mean, think about what's happening in our country now. And think about the lack of understanding and the lack of respect that people have for each other. And imagine what that would be if, when somebody says, I'm in favor of gun control, if instead of the other person saying, that's terrible, you're a terrible person, they said, really? Well, tell me more. I don't agree with you. Tell me where you're coming from. It would be an entirely different world. When I ride in Ubers with friends, I always start talking to the drivers because it's a chance to meet somebody and hear where they're coming from. My friends are like pulling on me and saying, shh, shh, shh. And I'm like, I'm not going to be quiet. I'm interested. It's a human being. I want to learn what they're like.
For your final question, you get to choose a number 1 through 100, and it will correlate to a personal question.
Oh, okay. 73.
Any reason why you picked that number?
No, it's the first one that came to my mind.
73.
Oh, I know where that number came from. I'm 71 and I start withdrawing funds from my retirement at 73. That's probably where it came from.
73 on the mind.
There you go.
Is happiness the ultimate goal of life? Why or why not?
Yes and no. Sorry to give a compromised, a qualified answer. I mean, it is, as long as you understand happiness situated in the context of community and relationships. If you think happiness just means do your own thing, then I would not say that it's the goal of life. If you understand happiness to mean I'm happy in the context of my relationships with other people, meaning I care about them being happy too, then I would say yes, happiness is. But if you think happiness is I got mine and I don't care if you got yours, that's not going to be a good life.
Yeah, I personally find I'm more happy when I help contribute to others' happiness.
That's clearly true, and something as a country I think we are dangerously forgetful about.
This has been really great, Dr. Weiss. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you for your interesting questions.
Yes, absolutely. I could talk to you for hours. And to find Dr. Weiss's book, we will have the links in the description, of course. And thank you so much for listening.